My name is Madeline Harper, and I used to think that 10 years of marriage meant safety, security, trust. But one evening changed everything I believed. It was our anniversary, 10 years to the day since Ethan and I stood under a canopy of garden lights and promised each other forever. To celebrate, he took me to the Crescent, the city's highest and most luxurious restaurant. The kind of place where you don't just dine, you perform success. The chandeliers sparkled like constellations and the skyline stretched like a painted backdrop behind our table. I wore a navy silk dress, simple but elegant, hugging just enough to show I still cared. Ethan looked sharp, as always. Crisp black suit, dark tie, a hint of that cedarwood cologne I once found comforting. He smiled as I sat down across from him, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Happy anniversary, Mads," he said, lifting a glass of Cabernet. "To us," I replied, clinking his glass with mine. But even then, something felt wrong. It was subtle, a shift in his energy. His voice was smooth, almost rehearsed, but strained underneath, like a violin string pulled too tight. He glanced at his phone more than at me. His fingers drummed the table while I tried to ask about his day. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe I was overthinking it. But deep down I knew the truth. Something had been off for months. Late-night calls he brushed off as client emergencies. Weekend meetings that popped up last minute. A growing coldness in his touch, like the man who once stayed up all night helping me design my first pitch deck had disappeared. That night, under the glow of that perfect skyline, I felt lonelier than I'd ever felt in our 10 years together. I didn't know yet what he had planned. I didn't know this night would end in a hospital, or that a glass of wine would change our lives forever. But I knew something wasn't right. And I was right. Looking back, the signs were there. They weren't loud or obvious. They were quiet, creeping things easy to dismiss, easier to excuse. But they were real. Ethan and I had always been a power couple in the eyes of others. He ran an investment firm with a shiny office and designer suits. I built my consulting agency from scratch. People admired us, thought we had it all figured out. And for a while, we did. But over the past year, things had shifted. Ethan became distracted, less present. It started small missed calls, vague answers about where he was, why he was late. I told myself he was just under pressure. Big clients, tight deadlines. I knew that world too well. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living with a stranger. He'd sit at the dinner table and barely touch his food, scrolling through his phone like it held a secret he couldn't share. When I'd ask about his day, his answers were clipped, guarded. "Same old," he'd say with a shrug. "You know how it is." But I didn't, not really. The intimacy we once had, late-night conversations, spontaneous weekend getaways, even small rituals like cooking together on Sundays had disappeared. In their place was silence, or, worse, politeness. Once I asked him if something was wrong. He looked up from his laptop, gave me a hollow smile, and said, "No, babe, just tired." But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't tired. He was elsewhere. Emotionally gone. There was a moment, a few weeks before our anniversary, when I found a second phone in his gym bag. It wasn't locked. But when I opened it, it was wiped clean, no contacts, no messages, nothing but a home screen. I wanted to believe it was nothing. Maybe he was trying to separate work and personal life. Maybe it wasn't even his. But my gut said otherwise. That night, I lay awake next to him, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we got here. Two people under the same roof, living two different stories. And still, I didn't leave. I didn't ask the hard questions. I wanted to believe in us, believe that this was just a phase, a rough patch. But sometimes, what we call a rough patch is really just the beginning of an ending. I excused myself halfway through the meal, claiming I needed to freshen up. In truth, I just needed space. The tension at the table was unbearable, like sitting across from a mask you used to love. The hallway outside the dining room was quiet, dim lighting, polished marble floors, a soft jazz tune playing overhead. I leaned against the wall for a moment, closing my eyes. My heart was racing, and I didn't even know why. That's when I heard someone say my name. Not Mom or excuse me, but my actual name. "Mrs. Harper?" I turned. It was the waitress who had been serving us all evening. She looked barely 20, her dark hair braided and tied back neatly. Her name tag read Sarah. But now, her expression was different, tense, serious. She glanced nervously around before stepping closer. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she whispered, "but I need to tell you something." I blinked. "What is it?" Her voice dropped even lower. I saw your husband put something in your wine. Everything inside me went still. She rushed to explain. When you got up to go to the restroom, I was clearing a table nearby, so I saw him pull something from his coat pocket and drop it into your glass. It dissolved fast. I don't know what it was, but the way he did it, it didn't feel right. I just stared at her. Surely she was mistaken. Ethan, he might be distant, even cold lately, but poison. You're sure? I asked. I'm sure, she said, eyes wide. I've seen him here before. He always acts so careful. Calculated. I wouldn't have said anything if I wasn't absolutely certain. The hallway seemed to shrink around me. My breath caught in my chest. Sarah glanced toward the restroom door. I have to get back before they notice I'm gone. I'm sorry. If it were me, I'd want someone to tell me. And just like that, she slipped away. I stood there frozen, one hand gripping the edge of the sink, the other still clutching my clutch bag like it was the only solid thing left in the world. I wanted to believe she was wrong. That Sarah had misunderstood, that Ethan had done something innocent stirring sugar, maybe. But deep down, I knew. Something was very, very, very wrong. And suddenly, the man I had spent 10 years beside wasn't just a stranger anymore. He might be something far worse. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the woman in the navy dress. Her face looked familiar, but something about her had changed. Her eyes weren't just tired, they were wide with something sharper. Fear, yes, but also clarity. I had a choice to make. If Sarah was wrong, I'd look foolish, paranoid. But if she was right, I couldn't afford to ignore it. I took a deep breath, smoothed the creases from my dress, and stepped back into the hallway. The buzz of the dining room returned like background noise I could no longer pretend was beautiful. Everything felt louder now, every laugh, every clink of glass, every flicker of candlelight. When I reached our table, Ethan barely looked up from his phone. "Everything okay?" he asked, slipping his phone face down. "Yeah," I said lightly, "just needed a moment." He smiled. "You sure? You look pale." "Headache. Nothing serious." I sat down slowly, my eyes drifting to the 2 glasses of Cabernet still resting on the table. Mine was on the right, where I had left it. His, untouched, was on the left. And somewhere inside one of them, a lie waited. I made my move casually, hiding it behind a stretch and a quiet laugh. I reached for my glass, then paused. "This wine's too good to waste," I joked, and in a single smooth motion, I slid his glass toward me and nudged mine to his side. He didn't notice. His eyes were back on his phone, his fingers tapping some urgent message. I took a small sip. It tasted rich, slightly dry, just like always, but the wine sat heavy on my tongue, the bitterness blending with dread. "To 10 more years," I said, raising the glass, my eyes locked on his. He looked up, surprised for half a second, then smiled thinly and raised his own glass. "To 10 more," he echoed, and drank deeply. I watched his throat move, watched the wine vanish, my own glass, his, really still half full. A strange quiet settled between us. I kept smiling, even as every part of me screamed. Had I just made a huge mistake? Had I tested something that didn't exist? Or had I just placed Ethan on a collision course with his own intention? I didn't know yet. But what I did know, as I sat there holding the wrong glass in the right hand, was that I'd stopped being passive. I was no longer the woman waiting to be acted upon. I was the one watching now, the one listening. And if he had tried to hurt me, then I had just turned his plan on its head. At first, nothing happened. Ethan leaned back in his chair, casually wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. He looked relaxed, too relaxed. The kind of ease that came not from comfort, but from belief that he was in control, that everything was going according to plan. I twirled my fork, forcing myself to appear calm. But my fingers trembled just enough that I had to keep them hidden under the table. I watched him carefully, every blink, every breath, every nervous glance at his watch. "So," I said, my voice light, "how's that big deal going? The one that's been keeping you up every night?" His eyes narrowed just slightly. "It's complicated," he said, his tone clipped. "Big stakes. High risk. You know how it is." I nodded slowly. "Sure. But you've always liked the high-stakes games, haven't you?" He didn't respond. Just reached for his water and took a small sip. Then, he glanced at my wine glass, his wine glass, and paused. "You're not drinking much," he said, tone casual. "Saving it," I replied, smiling sweetly. "This one deserves to be savored." His fingers drummed against the table again. Faster this time, then slower, then they stopped altogether. A few seconds passed. Then he coughed. Just once, dry, quick. Then again. And again. My heart thudded in my chest as he brought his hand to his forehead. "You okay?" I asked, voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Yeah," he muttered, "just tired." But he didn't look tired. His face had lost its color. A thin sheen of sweat gathered at his hairline. His eyes blinked rapidly, unfocused. His hand trembled as he reached for his wine, my wine, but missed. The glass tipped, spilling across the table like dark blood on white linen. "Ethan," I stood quickly, the chair legs screeching against the floor. He groaned, slumping forward. His body sagged as if the strings had been cut. Someone gasped behind me. A waiter dropped a tray. The dining room quieted, and suddenly all eyes were on us. "Call 911, I shouted. Sarah appeared out of nowhere, her face pale as chalk. She stared at Ethan, then at me. The man slumped at the table. My husband of 10 years wasn't just unwell. He was unraveling. And I knew, without a doubt, that the glass he had meant for me had betrayed him instead. His plan had just failed. And I had just survived it. The emergency room was cold, not in temperature, but in spirit, a kind of stillness that made time feel suspended. I sat alone in a plastic chair, my navy silk dress wrinkled and stained with Cabernet, the same wine that almost ended my life. Everything felt distant. The buzz of fluorescent lights, the hum of a vending machine, a local news anchor murmuring from a wall-mounted TV no one was watching. I hadn't called anyone. Who would I call? My parents were retired in Florida. My coworkers thought I lived a picture-perfect life. I wasn't ready to explain that my husband might have tried to poison me. My hands were clenched in my lap, still trembling. I kept replaying the scene, the way he'd looked at my glass, the way his body began to fold in on itself, the way I'd stood there watching. A door opened. A doctor in a white coat stepped into the waiting area, scanning the room. "Mrs. Harper?" she asked. I stood, my knees slightly buckling. "I'm Dr. Patel," she said, guiding me to a quieter corner. "Your husband is stable, but he's under sedation. He ingested a high dose of a controlled sedative, diazepam, not the over-the-counter kind. This was heavily concentrated, possibly lethal if left untreated." My mouth went dry. I swallowed hard. I think that was meant for me," I said quietly. Her brows lifted slightly, but she didn't interrupt. "A waitress warned me. She saw him put something in my drink. So I swapped our glasses." Dr. Patel nodded slowly, her voice calm. "That would explain it. The dosage in his system was far beyond what's safe. He's lucky you acted when you did." I looked away, my throat tightening. I didn't even know for sure. I didn't want to believe it. She set her clipboard against her chest. "We'll need to involve the police. This isn't just a medical emergency, it's a legal matter now. You did the right thing." The right thing? Was that what it was? I felt like I was drifting between two versions of reality, one where my husband was my partner, my protector, and one where he had quietly planned to eliminate me. All for what? Money? Control? I sat back down, this time not to wait, but to gather myself. The man I thought I knew was behind a hospital curtain, sedated, alive. But the truth between us was exposed. And nothing could cover it back up. The truth came out faster than I expected. It started with a call from one of Ethan's former clients, a woman named Lacey, who used to gush about how Ethan saved her portfolio. She called me 2 days after the hospital incident. Her voice was trembling. "I didn't know who else to tell," she said, "but I think Ethan's firm is in serious trouble." That was an understatement. Within a week, everything unraveled, quietly then publicly. Ethan's investment company, once praised in local business magazines, was collapsing. Months of bad trades, failed investments, and increasingly risky deals had caught up to him. Creditors were circling. Lawsuits were already being drafted. I found documents hidden in a storage bin in our home office, papers he clearly hoped I'd never see. There were letters from banks, warnings from the SEC, even an unsigned power of attorney form that would have transferred all my company assets to his name if I had been incapacitated. That's what he wanted. Not my death necessarily, but my silence, my disappearance. He needed control, and he was desperate enough to do the unthinkable to get it. He must thought if I couldn't speak, If I couldn't act, he could step in. As my husband, he would have claimed authority, access, ownership. What broke me most wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the calculated patience. The way he smiled at me over dinner. The way he touched my hand, called me Mads, acted like nothing was wrong. He was drowning, and he was ready to drag me under just to keep himself afloat. But I didn't drown. I didn't sip that wine. And now the man who once promised to build a future with me was facing charges instead of champagne. All because I listened to a whisper and trusted my gut over a familiar smile. In the days that followed, I moved through life like a shadow. The media caught wind of the story before I was ready. Headlines hinted at scandal. Investment star hospitalized after wine incident. My name was there, always paired with his. But no one knew the full story, at least not yet. Some friends reached out, confused. Others disappeared completely, as if discomfort was contagious. I didn't blame them. Who wants to believe a man like Ethan, charming, respected, always the one raising a toast, could be capable of what he did? But I wasn't interested in saving face. I was interested in the truth. When the detectives called, I didn't hesitate. I told them everything. From Sarah's warning to the glass switch. From the hidden documents to the storage bin full of secrets. I handed it all over emails, notes, even my own journals. Ethan was charged with attempted poisoning, among other crimes related to financial fraud. His lawyer tried to spin it, said it was all a misunderstanding, that he was under pressure, mentally unstable. But I'd lived beside that mind for 10 years. I knew the difference between instability and strategy. I didn't attend the first court hearing. I stayed home, sitting by the window in silence, drinking tea from a mug Ethan never liked. The sky outside was gray, but it felt honest. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up a blank document, and started writing. Not about revenge, not about anger, but about survival. About how, sometimes, the most dangerous place for a woman isn't a dark alley but the familiar space across the table from the man who says he loves her. And about how listening to your instincts, no matter how soft the whisper, isn't just brave. It's what saves you. I don't know exactly when it happened, when I stopped seeing myself as a victim and started recognizing my strength. Maybe it was the moment I swapped those glasses. Maybe it was the second I chose to believe the frightened voice of a stranger over the calm smile of my husband. Or maybe it was afterward, when I stood in front of a mirror and saw a woman I finally respected. The months that followed weren't easy. Healing rarely is. I went to therapy. I distanced myself from people who still clung to the illusion of our marriage. I let myself grieve not just the relationship, but the years I spent shrinking so someone else could shine. And then I began to speak. It started small. A women's leadership conference. Then a podcast. Then a panel at a nonprofit dedicated to helping women recognize coercion and financial manipulation in relationships. I didn't tell my story for attention. I told it because silence is what almost killed me. Today, I'm not defined by what happened that night at the Crescent. I'm defined by what I did after. I rebuilt. I returned to my company stronger than before. I hired Sarah, the young waitress who warned me, as my executive assistant. She's studying business now, and I'm proud to mentor her. People still ask if I ever loved Ethan. And the truth is yes, I did, deeply. But love isn't a reason to sacrifice your safety. So it's not an excuse for betrayal. And no one, no matter how familiar, has the right to make you doubt your reality. If you're still watching this, and if my story resonates with you even a little, then hear this. Trust yourself. Listen to your instincts. Don't wait for the crash to confirm what your gut already knows. And if you've ever escaped something that once felt unescapable, I hope you take a moment to honor your survival. This is Madeline's story. But maybe it's yours too. If this touched you in any way, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. And subscribe to The Art of Revenge, where true stories of strength, clarity, and quiet triumph are brought to light. Your voice matters. And your truth is never too small to be heard.
My name is Linda Harper, and I am 68 years old. If someone had told me that the deepest wound of my life would come not from an enemy, but from the daughter I raised, I would have laughed in disbelief. Yet on a quiet morning not long ago, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and opened my bank account on my laptop. My eyes locked on the numbers glowing on the screen. $450,000 had vanished overnight. At first, I thought there had been a bank error or maybe a system glitch. But before I could call customer service, my phone buzzed with a text message that made my blood run cold. "Thanks for the house and the car, Mom." A little smiley face followed as if this was some kind of joke. I froze. That message was from Emily, my daughter. The little girl I had adopted when she was 3 years old after her parents died in a car accident. I raised her as my own, poured every ounce of love I had into her, and built my life around making sure she would never feel abandoned again. I read her message over and over, unable to believe what I was seeing. My daughter had not just taken some money. She had drained almost $500,000 in one night, and then thanked me as if I had simply handed her a gift. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm. But as I sat there staring at that mocking text, one truth became painfully clear. The betrayal I felt in that moment was far heavier than any financial loss. Emily thought she had outsmarted me, thought she had finally secured the life she deserved at my expense. What she did not know was that she had just opened a door she would never be able to close again. When I arrived home later that morning, Emily and her husband Brian were waiting in the living room. They sat side by side on the sofa, their faces lit up with satisfaction. Emily dangled a shiny set of car keys from her fingers, while Brian leaned back with a smug grin, as if the world finally belonged to them. The air was thick with their triumph. "Mom, we have something to tell you," Emily began, her voice almost playful. "We bought a house. A beautiful 3-bedroom place with a yard. And of course, a brand new car." She flashed the keys again for emphasis, her eyes daring me to react. I stood still, clutching my purse, forcing my tone to remain even. "And where exactly did the money come from?" Emily tilted her head with exaggerated innocence. "From your account, of course. The savings you always kept for us, for our future. Brian and I figured it was only fair that after all your hard work you help us get started." Brian nodded firmly. "You had the money sitting there, Linda. We thought you wanted the best for your daughter. Isn't this what any parent would do?" My chest tightened. I thought back to the years I had scraped and sacrificed for her. "Emily," I said slowly, "do you remember who paid your tuition when you decided college was too expensive? Or who sold her car so you could buy that green prom dress you just had to have? Or maybe who mortgaged this very house so you could have the wedding you wanted?" "That was different," Brian muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "That was your duty as a mother." My duty. As if raising her, loving her, and giving up my dreams for her was not enough. As if I was nothing more than an endless source of money. Emily crossed her arms and lifted her chin. "Look, Mom, it's already done. The house is in our name, and the car too. You can't undo it. And honestly, after years of acting like we were barely scraping by, I think I deserve this." I looked at her carefully, memorizing the smug curve of her mouth and the pride in her eyes. She believed she had finally won, but she had no idea what kind of game she had just started. I remained silent as Emily and Brian celebrated their so-called victory. They thought they had cornered me, that they had finally broken free from what Emily liked to call my poverty act. What they did not know, what they had never bothered to ask, was who I truly was. For years I had kept my personal life and my professional life separate. To Emily, I was the tired old woman who scrubbed off ice floors for a paycheck, always worried about bills, always sighing over rising grocery prices. That was the image I let her see. It was simpler that way. I wanted her to grow up without the weight of my responsibilities or the temptation of easy money. What Emily did not know was that behind those long hours I also built something lasting. Brick by brick, late nights after cleaning shifts, I studied business and accounting. Slowly, I created a logistics company that grew from one truck into a fleet, from one client into dozens. I kept my ownership quiet, letting others take the public spotlight, while I managed operations from the shadows. To Emily, I was just Mom. To the world of commerce, I was Mrs. Harper, founder and CEO. So when she drained nearly $500,000, she assumed she had taken from a bottomless savings account I had hidden from her. But she was wrong. The account she raided was not my personal nest egg. It was the operating account of Harper Logistics, the very account used to pay employees, suppliers, and taxes. An account watched closely by auditors and insured by federal regulations. By taking that money, Emily had not just stolen from me. She had stolen from 20 families who relied on their paychecks, from truck drivers counting on gas cards, from clients expecting their shipments on time. Emily smiled that day, thinking she had pulled one over on her poor old mother. What she did not realize was that she had committed a federal crime, and soon the smile she wore so proudly would disappear. The following morning, I sat in my car in the parking lot of Harper Logistics, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I dialed Arthur, my lawyer and longtime accountant, a man who had been with me since the early days of the company. When he answered, his voice carried a heaviness that told me he already knew. "Linda," he said, "there's a serious problem." The bank flagged a withdrawal of $450,000. It came from the operating account. "I know," I replied quietly. It was Emily, my daughter. For a long moment there was only silence on the line. Then Arthur sighed. "Linda, that account isn't like a savings account. Any unauthorized use is classified as embezzlement. This isn't just theft, it's a federal offense. We need to act quickly." His words pierced me. Embezzlement, federal offense, my own daughter. What are my options? I asked, steadying my voice. "Two paths," Arthur explained. "We can try to recover the money privately, talk to her, negotiate repayment, make it quiet. Or we file an official report, freeze her assets, and let the legal system handle it. But you need to understand, once we go legal, there's no turning back." I closed my eyes. Memories rushed in. Emily at 3 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit the day I brought her home. Emily at 12, begging me for new shoes I couldn't afford but bought anyway. Emily at 18, walking across the graduation stage while I cheered louder than anyone. I had given her everything, and yet she had chosen to betray me. Arthur's voice cut through my thoughts. "Linda, what do you want me to do?" I opened my eyes, staring at the reflection of my tired face in the car window. The betrayal stung like nothing I had ever felt, but so did the realization that Emily would never change if I kept shielding her. "Proceed legally," I said firmly. "She has to learn that actions have consequences." "All right," Arthur replied. "Then we start today." I hung up and leaned back in my seat, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. For the first time in years, I was no longer just protecting Emily. I was protecting myself, my company, and the people who depended on me. It was the hardest choice I had ever made as a mother, but the only right one. By the next afternoon, everything was set in motion. The court had approved an emergency order to seize the assets Emily had purchased with my company's money. Officers arrived at her new house in the upscale neighborhood of Willow Creek. Neighbors peeked through curtains as a shiny red car was hauled away on a flat truck, and a large notice was posted on the front door. The beautiful home she had boasted about just 24 hours earlier was no longer hers. It was now evidence in a federal case. My phone began buzzing relentlessly. Calls from Emily, from Brian, from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all, but the text messages kept coming. At first they were angry. "How could you do this to me? You are destroying our lives." Then they turned desperate. "Mom, please call me. We can work this out." Finally they became pitiful. "Please, I'm begging you. I'll give it all back. Just don't let them take me to jail." I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, reading every message with a calmness that surprised even me. For years I had jumped at every demand Emily made, every tear, every tantrum. This time I did nothing. I let the consequences fall exactly where they belonged. That evening, instead of going home to an empty house where Emily might come pounding on the door, I treated myself to something I had never dared before. I went shopping at the most exclusive mall in the city. I walked into boutiques I had only glanced at through windows while rushing between jobs. I bought an elegant black dress, Italian leather shoes, and a handbag that cost more than Emily once earned in 3 months at her receptionist job. The sales clerk's eyes widened when I handed her my platinum business card. For the first time in decades, I wasn't hiding who I was. While Emily and Brian sat in a cheap motel room, their dreams collapsing around them, I sipped champagne in the hotel lounge and planned my next steps. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of freedom. Emily thought she had stolen my future. She had no idea that all she had done was give me back my power. News of the case spread quickly. By the time the trial began, the courthouse steps were crowded with reporters eager to cover what they called the betrayal case. Cameras flashed as I walked past, dressed in a simple black suit and pearl necklace. I wasn't there to make a spectacle. I was there to seek justice. Inside the courtroom, Emily sat at the defense table in a gray suit that hung loosely on her frame. She looked far different from the woman who had strutted around with car keys dangling from her hand. Brian sat behind her, shifting uneasily, clearly wishing he could disappear. When our eyes met, Emily's were full of fear, not arrogance. For a moment my mother's heart squeezed. Then I remembered her mocking message, the pride in her voice when she said the money was hers by right, and I hardened again. The prosecutor, Mr. Davis, rose to deliver his opening statement. His voice was steady, precise. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about a misunderstanding between family members. It is about a deliberate, calculated theft that endangered the livelihoods of 20 families employed by Harper Logistics. Over the course of 6 months, the defendant, Emily Harper, withdrew a total of $580,000. She used those funds to purchase personal luxury items, a house and a car, while her mother struggled to keep the company running. His words echoed through the courtroom, leaving no room for confusion. The defense attorney, a young man barely out of law school, tried to counter. He painted Emily as a confused daughter who had grown up believing her mother was poor. She thought the money was set aside for her future, he argued. She misunderstood the situation. This is not the work of a hardened criminal. His tone lacked confidence. Even he knew the argument was weak. Witness after witness took the stand. Arthur, my accountant, laid out the numbers with precision, the dates, the amounts, the steady escalation from small withdrawals to the massive transfer. Brenda, my assistant, testified about Emily's visits to the office. She always seemed uncomfortable here, Brenda said. Mrs. Harper tried to include her, but Emily would change the subject or leave quickly. Then came Rosalie, my human resources manager. Her voice trembled with emotion as she described the chaos caused by the missing funds. We couldn't make payroll on time. Employees thought the company was going under. Some even started looking for other jobs. Each testimony was like another brick laid on top of Emily's crumbling defense. She sat hunched, eyes down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For perhaps the first time in her life, she could not talk her way out. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand slowly, feeling the weight of every sacrifice I had made as a mother. Mr. Davis guided me with his questions. I told the jury about adopting Emily, about the years of struggle, about the decision to keep my business a secret so she could have a normal childhood. I admitted that I had been too permissive, too eager to shield her from pain, and then I told them about the text message. Thanks for the house and the car, Mom. Those words broke me more than the money ever could. During cross-examination, the defense attorney tried to rattle me. Miss Harper, isn't it true you are pressing charges out of revenge? No, I answered calmly. I am pressing charges because my daughter committed a crime. Forgiving her as a mother does not mean excusing her actions as a citizen. The jury listened intently. I could see in their eyes that they understood. This was bigger than a family feud. It was about accountability. And accountability, at long last, was coming for Emily. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours before returning with their verdict. Guilty on all counts: embezzlement, fraud, and unauthorized use of financial instruments. Emily slumped in her chair, her shoulders shaking as she cried silently. Brian, who had attended every session, stood abruptly and stormed out, leaving her alone to face what came next. 1 week later, we gathered again in the courtroom for sentencing. The atmosphere was heavy, every whisper echoing off the walls. The judge, a stern man with a reputation for fairness, reviewed the evidence carefully before speaking. Miss Harper, this court has considered not only the magnitude of your crime, $580,000 stolen over a period of months, but also your lack of regard for the people whose livelihoods you endangered. Emily trembled, clutching the edge of the defense table. The judge's tone softened slightly. However, I also recognize that you are a first-time offender and that you have expressed remorse. Therefore, I sentence you to 6 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 4 years for good behavior. Additionally, you must pay restitution in the full amount, plus interest and legal fees, totaling $720,000. During your parole period, you are prohibited from contacting your mother without explicit judicial approval. The words fell like stones into the silent room. 10 years without contact. Emily's sobs grew louder. The bailiff approached, placing handcuffs on her wrists. She turned to me, her eyes swollen with tears. Mom, please, forgive me. Please don't let this be the end. I stood, my voice steady but not unkind. I already forgive you, Emily, but forgiveness does not erase consequences. You are not in prison because I am cruel. You are in prison because you made choices that led you here. As she was led away, she kept her eyes on me, searching for a softness I could no longer afford to give. For the first time in her life, there was no manipulation, no excuses, only fear, and at last respect. That was our final exchange before the doors closed behind her. 6 months passed after the sentencing, and my life began to look completely different. Without the constant turmoil of Emily's demands, the air around me felt lighter. Harper Logistics, once strained by her theft, was thriving again. We secured 3 major contracts, expanded to 30 employees, and even opened a second office in a nearby city. For the first time in years, I could focus fully on the business I had built with my own hands instead of on the chaos of trying to hold my family together. But the most meaningful changes weren't professional. They were personal. I sold the old house where every room carried the echoes of arguments, slammed doors, and years of unspoken resentment. In its place, I purchased a penthouse in the heart of the city. The wide windows overlooked the skyline, and at night I could see the light stretching endlessly. It felt symbolic, a new perspective, a higher place, a life reclaimed. I began to explore parts of myself I had long buried under the weight of motherhood. I enrolled in a painting class on Tuesday evenings, booked a long-delayed trip to Europe, and started enjoying dinners at fine restaurants without guilt. I realized how many years I had denied myself joy in the name of sacrifice. Now, I allowed myself to live fully. Friends who had drifted away returned, drawn not just by my success but by the peace I radiated. They told me I seemed lighter, freer. And they were right. For the first time in 24 years, I was not just Emily's mother. I was Linda Harper, businesswoman, artist, traveler, a woman who had finally chosen herself. The lesson was clear: when you set boundaries, you don't lose love, you gain respect. And sometimes you even gain back your life. 4 years later, a letter arrived in the mail with a return address that made my heart skip. Federal Correctional Institution. My hands trembled as I opened it, knowing it was from Emily. The restraining order had kept us apart, but she had received special permission through her parole officer to send me this one letter. Her handwriting was smaller than I remembered, steadier somehow. "Dear Mom," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a second chance. I only need you to know what these years have taught me." She wrote about the loneliness of prison, about the therapy sessions that forced her to face herself, and about the question a counselor had asked that shattered her: "Can you name a single time you truly sacrificed for your mother?" Emily admitted she could not once. She described the depression that followed, the nights she cried, until she had no tears left, and then the slow process of rebuilding. She had joined programs that taught responsibility, empathy, and gratitude. She had taken part in groups where she told her story to others, warning them of the dangers of entitlement. "I realized I wasn't your victim, Mom. I was your betrayer." Emily told me she was working at a bakery after her release, earning minimum wage, and sending every extra penny toward restitution. "It will take me years to pay you back," she wrote, "but I want you to know I'm trying. I want you to know your strength saved me. You didn't destroy me, you forced me to finally grow up." I finished the letter with tears running down my cheeks. They weren't tears of regret or anger. They were tears of relief, and maybe even of pride. For the first time in decades, I felt as if I had glimpsed the daughter I had always hoped Emily could become. As I folded Emily's letter and placed it gently back into the envelope, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had carried the weight of believing that unconditional love meant sacrificing myself, that forgiveness meant excusing harm. But life had taught me a harder, truer lesson. Love without boundaries is not love at all, it is surrender. And when we surrender our dignity, we teach others to treat us with less than we deserve. Emily's story is not just about stolen money. It is about respect, about choices, and about the cost of confusing love with endless tolerance. In the end, she learned what I had always hoped she would: that actions have consequences, and that gratitude is the foundation of every healthy relationship. And I learned, finally, that protecting yourself is not selfish, it is the first step toward genuine peace. If you are watching this and you've ever struggled with setting boundaries with the people you love, let this story remind you saying no is sometimes the most loving thing you can do, because respect is what turns love into something lasting. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. I was standing in my son's kitchen, carefully slicing the last of the lamb shoulder I had roasted overnight, when I heard the sound that would change everything. Jason, my only son, lifted his glass of wine, his voice louder than usual with celebration and alcohol. "If nobody wants seconds, we'll just feed it to the dogs." The room erupted in laughter. I froze. The serving spoon slipped from my hand and hit the tile with a metallic thud that seemed to echo louder than all the noise in the dining room. In that moment, the weight of 24 hours of cooking, $800 of my own money, and decades of unseen labor pressed down on me. I began packing every dish I had made, calm and deliberate. I walked out of the party without another word, but 3 hours later I was plating the most important meal of my life. My name is Mae Thompson, and I am 65 years old. For as long as I can remember, cooking has been my way of loving people. After my husband Walter passed away 2 years ago, the kitchen became my only language left to speak with the world. Every recipe I touched carried pieces of him, of our years together, of the family we raised. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being seen. To Jason and his wife Sloan, I became less a person and more a service. Need an extra dish? Call Mom. Hosting a big group. She'll handle it. The requests came without gratitude, without even asking, just assumptions that I would give, and give again. I lived on Social Security, stretching every dollar, dreaming of one small apartment of my own, with a porch where I could sit quietly without feeling like an intruder in my son's house. That dream always seemed out of reach until that night when his careless joke pushed me to see myself differently. The night before the party, while most of the city slept, I was awake in the kitchen. At midnight I set beef bones to simmer, coaxing broth rich with rosemary and thyme. By 3 in the morning I was peeling carrots and dicing onions, the knife moving with the ease of someone who had cooked for decades. At 5, I slid 2 lamb shoulders into the oven, their seasoned crust filling the house with a fragrance that reminded me of the restaurant I once dreamed of opening but never did. The work was endless. Stuffed portobello mushrooms lined a tray at 7. By 8, chocolate mousse was cooling in the refrigerator, while asparagus waited for a drizzle of hollandaise. I whisked by hand until my arm throbbed. My counters disappeared under lists and portions, careful calculations for 43 guests. Every new text from Sloan added more names to the list: her book club, Jason's college friends, neighbors I didn't know. No one asked if it was possible. They simply assumed I would stretch myself thinner. $867 gone from my savings, money I had quietly set aside for that apartment with the park view. All of it spent to create a feast I wasn't sure anyone would even notice. By the time Jason wandered into the kitchen that morning, my back already ached from hours of bending and lifting. He poured himself a mug of coffee and glanced at the trays stacked high with food. "Smells incredible in here, Mom. You didn't have to go this crazy." Sloan ordered some appetizers from downtown just to supplement. Supplement. The word hit harder than I expected, as though my roasted lamb, twice-baked potatoes, and carefully crafted desserts were not enough, just filler behind store-bought crackers and cheese. I kept whisking, though my hollandaise broke into yellow streaks that refused to come together. "I'd been planning for 43 people, Jason," I said, sharper than I intended. He gave me that expression I'd grown used to lately, mild surprise, like he'd forgotten I was capable of opinions at all. "Okay, Mom, whatever you think is best." Whatever I think is best, words meant to smooth things over, not to listen, not to value, only to keep me quiet. By late afternoon, guests began to arrive in a steady stream. The living room filled with laughter, the clink of wine glasses, and the hum of conversations between people I barely knew. From the kitchen doorway, I watched Sloan glide through the crowd in her red dress, her smile polished and effortless. She accepted compliments for the decor, for the atmosphere, even for the food. "The lamb is incredible," I heard a neighbor say, balancing a plate. "Thank you so much," Sloan replied without hesitation, as if she had been the one marinating and roasting since dawn. I carried fresh platters to the table, setting them down beside untouched trays of store-bought crackers and cheese. Guests reached for the lamb, the vegetables, the mouse, and turned their praise toward Sloan. Every "what a beautiful party" and "this is amazing" was directed her way. Meanwhile, I moved silently in the background, washing dishes, refilling trays, keeping the evening afloat. Invisible in my own kitchen, I watched others take credit for the very work that had drained me to exhaustion. To them, I wasn't a guest or even a host. I was part of the service. The party had reached its peak by early evening. Plates were scattered across the table, wine glasses half full, laughter rising above the music. I was in the kitchen, slicing the last of the lamb for seconds, when Jason's voice rang out from the dining room, louder than usual, buoyed by celebration. "Well, if nobody wants more, we'll just feed it to the dogs." The room erupted. Cheerful, careless laughter filled the air. I froze. The serving spoon slipped from my hand and clattered onto the tile, echoing through the kitchen like a verdict. 24 hours of labor, $800 of my savings, sleeplessness, aching arms, and now, my food reduced to a joke about scraps. I stood motionless, my chest tightening as the laughter carried on without pause. Sloane's giggle rose above the rest, light and musical. To them it was funny. To me it was the moment something broke that could never be mended. I bent down and picked up the spoon, the metal cool in my hand. Instead of setting it back, I reached for the aluminum pan stacked in the corner. My movements were calm, deliberate, almost rehearsed. I slid the lamb into one pan, then the roasted vegetables, then the stuffed mushrooms. Each dish I had poured myself into was carefully returned to its container. Jason appeared in the doorway, his smile fading when he saw what I was doing. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Taking the food home," I answered, still packing. "What? Why? That was just a joke." "You said you'd feed it to the dogs," I replied, finally meeting his eyes. "I wouldn't want to deprive them." His face reddened, his words stumbling. "Mom, please don't be ridiculous." "Ridiculous," I repeated quietly, stacking another container. Yes, it was ridiculous of me to think my cooking mattered more than scraps. The room behind him had fallen quiet. I could feel eyes turning toward us, the party's laughter replaced by awkward silence. I lifted the last box into my arms and walked past my son, past Sloane, past the stunned guests. Not one of them tried to stop me. The night air was sharp as I loaded the containers into my old sedan. My phone buzzed before I even turned the key. A call from Noah, my nephew. His voice cracked with panic the moment I answered. "Aunt May, thank God. I'm in trouble. My head chef just called out fever, can't stand up. Tonight's the Ford wedding reception, 80 guests, plated dinner, and I've got nothing." I could picture him pacing in the small bar of his restaurant, running a hand through his hair like he used to when he was a boy. "What about your sus chef?" I asked. "Broken wrist. I've got 2 kids on the line who can barely handle appetizers. I'm going to have to cancel. If I do, the lawsuit will sink me. 5 years of work gone in one night." His voice broke. I looked at the stacked pans around me, lamb, roasted vegetables, potatoes, mouse, all dismissed as dog food only an hour before. Enough to feed a crowd. Enough to rescue a wedding. "What's the menu?" I asked. Noah hesitated. "Prime rib with red wine reduction, salmon, roasted vegetables, Duchess potatoes, and chocolate raspberry tart." I did the math. My lamb could be reworked, the potatoes repurposed, the mouse turned into tarts. "I'm 15 minutes away," I told him, starting the car. "Preheat your ovens. Tonight we're going to save that wedding." When I pulled into the back lot of Creekside Kitchen, Noah was already waiting, his vest half-buttoned, his face pale with stress. "Aunt May, how much food did you make?" he asked, staring at the containers filling my back seat. "Apparently too much," I said, handing him the first pan. "This lamb can stand in for prime rib if we slice it right. Do you have stock for reduction?" "Everything. The kitchen's fully stocked," he replied, trailing me inside. The line cooks looked up, wide-eyed, as I surveyed the counters. It wasn't a home kitchen, it was smaller, tighter, but built for efficiency. I rolled up my sleeves, set the pans on stainless steel, and began giving orders. "We'll reseason the lamb, thin slices, fanned on plates. Vegetables, garnish and shine. Potatoes piped into Duchess form, crisp edges. Mouse into tarts, get raspberries now." For the first time all day I felt steady. In this kitchen I wasn't invisible. I was in charge. By 7:30 the first plates left the pass. Thin slices of lamb, glistening under a red wine reduction, rested beside Duchess potatoes piped into golden peaks. Roasted vegetables framed the plate like jewels, and the chocolate mousse, reborn as tarts with fresh raspberries, gleamed under the dining room lights. Servers carried the dishes out, and within minutes the room filled with the low hum of approval. Laughter returned, but this time it was paired with praise. "The prime rib is phenomenal," one server reported, stacking empty plates. "Table 6 wants to thank the chef personally." From the service window, I saw the bride and groom raising glasses, their smiles wide, their families beaming with pride. The kind of joy that reminded me why food mattered in the first place. For years my efforts had been background noise. Tonight, for the first time, People asked not just about the food, but about me, the person who had created it. After dessert plates were cleared and the last toast echoed through the dining room, a woman in her early 60s appeared at the kitchen door. Her silver hair was swept back neatly, and her eyes carried the calm confidence of someone used to making decisions. She extended her hand. "I'm Dana Whitmore," she said. "Our foundation hosted tonight's wedding. I had to thank you personally. You saved this evening?" I wiped my hands on my apron, suddenly self-conscious. I just stepped in to help my nephew. "I'm glad it worked out." "Worked out," she gave a soft laugh. "This was exceptional. Where did you train?" "I didn't. Just a lifetime of cooking." She studied me a long moment, as though weighing not just my words but everything behind them. Then she pressed a card into my hand. "We host major events year-round: galas, fundraisers, corporate dinners. We've been disappointed with our catering company lately. If you're open to it, I'd like to see what you could do for us. Start with something small. 40 guests next Friday." I stared at the card, her name embossed in gold. It wasn't just thanks. It was a door I had never thought might open for me. For 3 days, Dana's card sat in my purse like a secret I wasn't ready to claim. I carried it with me to the grocery store, to the laundry, even to bed, the edges pressing into the fabric whenever I reached for my wallet. I told myself I was just waiting for the right moment. The truth was, I was afraid. What if I failed? What if stepping into something new at 65 proved I wasn't capable after all? On Tuesday morning, I walked to the farmer's market. Usually my shopping was practical, whatever Jason's family needed, whatever stretched the budget. But that day, I filled a basket with things just for me: heirloom tomatoes, a loaf of fresh sourdough, a bunch of flowers I had no reason to buy other than they were beautiful. At the tomato stall, I ran into an old friend, Nancy, who had worked with Walter years ago. She looked me over with sharp eyes. "May, what's wrong?" The practiced words "nothing, I'm fine" rose to my lips, but for once I didn't use them. I told her everything: the party, Jason's joke, my walkout, the wedding I had saved. She listened without interruption, then put her hand firmly on my arm. "Call that woman May. Don't waste another day." That evening, when I walked back into my house, Jason and Sloane were waiting on the living room couch. They looked like they belonged there, comfortable, expectant, as if my silence these past days had been an inconvenience. "There you are," Sloane said, her smile thin. "We've been calling. We thought maybe there was some miscommunication about Saturday." "Miscommunication?" I repeated, setting down my bag. "Jason joked about feeding my food to the dogs." Everyone laughed. Jason shifted, hands in his pockets like a boy caught doing something wrong. "Mom, it came out wrong." "I'm sorry, the food was great. We were just joking around." Sloane leaned forward. "Why don't we do Sunday dinner this week? Invite my parents? Make it a family thing. Start fresh." I looked at them both, steady and calm. "I'm busy Sunday." "Busy?" Jason frowned. "Doing what?" "Working," I said. "And from now on, that's not something I'll apologize for." Friday evening arrived faster than I expected. At the Riverfront Country Club, I walked through marble halls with Dana at my side, my chef's coat crisp, my knives carefully packed. 40 donors were gathering in a private dining room, and the main course was mine to deliver. The kitchen was larger than anything I had worked in, gleaming with polished steel and humming with staff. For a moment, nerves caught my breath, but then I fell into rhythm, checking oven temperatures, reducing wine for the sauce, adjusting seasoning with the confidence that came from years behind a stove. "Duck, medium rare, table 7, I called, plating with precision. The staff responded quickly, following my lead as though they had always known me. When the last plates went out, the dining room glowed with satisfied conversation. For once, I wasn't a shadow in the kitchen. I was the reason the evening felt complete. As the last plates were cleared, Dana introduced me to a tall man at table 3. His silver hair and tailored suit spoke of old money, but his handshake was warm. "Mitchell Hayes," he said. "I wanted to thank the chef personally. That duck was exceptional. I'm hosting a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital next month. 200 guests, seated dinner. Would you be interested?" 200. The number hit me like a wave. My hands trembled slightly, though I clasped them behind my back. "That's quite large," I managed. He smiled knowingly. "I can tell when food has been crafted by real talent. We'll provide full staff and give you creative control." Later, back in the quiet of the prep room, my phone buzzed. A text from Sloane: "We need to talk." I'm pregnant. I stared at the message, the meaning clear. They needed me again, free childcare, free cooking, free labor. The old May would have answered immediately. This time I turned the phone face down. The next morning I walked into the leasing office of a modest apartment complex I had admired for years. Sunlight spilled across the front desk as the manager slid a key across the counter. Unit 3 billion, Parkview. My hands shook as I picked it up. For the first time in decades, I held a key to a place that was mine alone. No shared space, no borrowed corners, just mine. With Dana's check safely deposited, I bought chef's coats that actually fit in a sturdy knife roll. On my kitchen table, I spread out menus for upcoming events: the Children's Hospital fundraiser, a corporate dinner for 50, and 2 weddings that had come through referrals. The numbers didn't lie. What I once thought was impossible was now real income, real independence. Sunday came and went without me at Jason and Sloane's table. Instead, I was at my own desk writing shopping lists and timing courses. For the first time, my future felt like something I was building, not something I was sacrificing for. 6 months later, I stood in a kitchen that bore my name, May's Table. Sunlight streamed through tall warehouse windows, gleaming off stainless steel counters and shelves lined with my own equipment. The walls carried framed photos from events I had catered: weddings, fundraisers, corporate galas, each one a reminder that my work mattered. Noah had joined me as a partner, and a young cease chef named Anya handled prep with skill and confidence. Clients booked months in advance, word spreading faster than I could have imagined. One morning, I unfolded a newspaper and saw my own face smiling back. "Local chef finds late career success," the headline read. I looked at the photo, me in crisp whites, hands resting on the counter, and hardly recognized the woman staring back. She looked like someone who had finally stepped into the life she was meant to live. One afternoon, as lunch prep wound down, I looked up to see Jason standing in the doorway of my kitchen. He wore his office suit, out of place among the aprons and clattering pans. His eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in the walk-in cooler, the gleaming ovens, the staff moving with practiced rhythm. "Mom," he said quietly, "I had no idea it was like this. A real business. I'm proud of you." He hesitated, then added, "I owe you an apology, not just for that night, for years of taking you for granted." I nodded. "Thank you, but understand something, I'm available now only for what I choose, not for what you expect." Jason lowered his gaze, then looked back with sincerity I hadn't seen in years. "I want a relationship with you, not your service." A week later, my phone buzzed with a call I didn't expect. Sloane's name glowed on the screen. I almost let it ring, but curiosity made me answer. "May," her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "I saw the article. Congratulations." "Thank you," I said, cautious. There was a pause before she continued. "I want to apologize for the way we treated you, for not seeing you, for taking you for granted." For a long moment I didn't speak. Hearing those words was like feeling a locked door finally open. "The baby's kicking now," she added. "Would you like to feel it sometime?" I smiled. "I'd like that. But next time, come to my apartment. I'll cook." There was another pause, then a quiet laugh. "I'd like that too." Looking back, I realized this story wasn't just about food or family, it was about worth. For years, I thought being needed was the same as being valued. But there's a difference. Here's what I've learned. Boundaries spoken with calmness can change everything. Skills you've practiced quietly for years can open doors when you least expect it. Family ties matter, but respect matters more. Repair is possible, but only when people are willing to see you for who you are, not just what you provide. I hope my story reminds you that it's never too late to choose yourself. Whether you're 65 or 25, your value doesn't disappear just because others overlook it. Sometimes it only takes one moment of courage to change the rest of your life. In the end, my revenge wasn't about anger. It wasn't about taking anything away from Jason or Sloane. It was about finally taking my own life back. I built something that gave me dignity, independence, and a voice I hadn't used in years. The best answer to being dismissed wasn't fury, it was creation. Not destruction, but choice. I chose to step forward instead of staying invisible, and that choice changed everything. If my story speaks to you, I'd love to know, what boundary are you ready to set in your own life? Share it in the comments below. And if you'd like to hear more stories where ordinary people reclaim their worth, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder. It's never too late to choose yourself.